You think you own your home. You pay your mortgage, you mow your lawn, you sleep soundly, until a piece of paper arrives that proves you own nothing but a lease on your own peace of mind. For years, I lived on the edge of the exclusive Lakeview Heights community, a haven carved out of old New England farmland. But on the very edge of my property stood my inheritance, a weathered, beautiful, 200-year-old barn. It was a relic, a monument, a link to a time before central air and matching mailboxes. The Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association, or HOA, saw something different. They saw an eyesore. They saw a structural nonconformity. They saw a target. And their solution, a non-negotiable demand, delivered in a certified envelope: move the barn or face immediate legal action. But the real threat wasn't just losing the barn. The real threat was what they were trying to gain, and it involved my lakefront access. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How can an organization created to manage trash pickup and pool maintenance suddenly dictate the fate of a historical structure? Are HOAs a necessary evil or a modern-day land grab? Let me know in the comments if your HOA has ever tried to control something you thought was untouchable. To understand this battle, you have to understand the history of the HOA. The modern Homeowners Association is a uniquely American construct, a direct descendant of the early 20th century urban planning movement focused on maintaining aesthetic uniformity and property values. They sound great on paper. Who doesn't want high property values? But somewhere along the line, the concept of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, morphed from ensuring grass height to demanding the demolition of history. Their power is often derived from a simple fact: you sign the contract. You trade a piece of your autonomy for the privilege of community living. My property, however, was an anomaly. It was the original farmhouse and barn complex, sold off decades ago but always left just outside the HOA's core jurisdiction. The previous owners had an uneasy peace with Lakeview Heights, but a new board, led by a man named Mr. Sterling, a man who drove a gleaming white Range Rover and believed his power extended to the molecular structure of my lawn, decided to redraw the lines. The demand was simple, yet absurd. The barn's foundation encroached upon a newly defined common area setback by a mere 3 feet. That setback, of course, conveniently ran along the most desirable stretch of lakefront. If I moved the barn, I would be implicitly surrendering that sliver of prime land to the HOA, effectively pushing my property line away from the water. The legal letters kept coming, each one thicker, more official, and dripping with thinly veiled threats of massive daily fines. The pressure was immense. My neighbors, afraid to speak up, started avoiding me. I felt the walls closing in. The fear was real. The clock was ticking. I needed a defense that didn't rely on modern zoning laws, because those were drafted long after the barn was built. I needed something older, something that predated the very idea of Lakeview Heights. I had a faint, impossible memory from my grandfather about a box in the attic. A box he only ever referred to as the Antiquity. Little did I know, this simple cedar box held the key not only to saving my barn but to the ownership of the entire HOA lakefront. The search for the Antiquity was a race against the HOA's legal calendar. I was given 60 days to comply or face court. I spent every night after work in the sweltering, dust-choked attic, wading through generations of forgotten possessions. There were old army uniforms, wedding dresses from the 1920s, and countless brittle photo albums. Nothing. I was about to give up, resigned to hiring a crew to try and physically relocate the massive barn. A logistical and financial nightmare when I found it, tucked behind a crumbling dollhouse, in a space that must have been missed during a century of spring cleanings, was a small, unassuming cedar chest. It was locked, and there was no key. I finally managed to pry it open. Inside, it wasn't gold or jewels. It was better. It was a single, tightly rolled scroll, secured with a brittle leather strap. The parchment was thick, hand-pressed, and stained the color of weak tea. I'll be honest, my first thought was, did I just discover the local town charter? My second thought was, I really hope this doesn't crumble into dust before I can read it. It looked like something Indiana Jones would refuse to touch without gloves. The script was a beautiful, looping cursive, clearly penned by a master scribe. It took me hours, magnifying glass in hand, just to decipher the archaic language and the colonial-era terminology. But as the words came into focus, a shock of pure, electrifying excitement hit me. This wasn't just a deed. This was a patent deed from 1812. This 1812 document detailed the original land grant from the newly formed state government to my family's direct ancestors. It meticulously described the boundaries of the farm, and it confirmed one crucial, game-changing fact. The barn was precisely where it was supposed to be. The encroachment was simply a misunderstanding of a 200-year-old boundary marker, a massive, unmistakable granite boulder mentioned in the deed. The barn was safe, but the real power of the Antiquity lay in a single, almost faded paragraph near the bottom. This clause described the extent of the original grant, specifically outlining the southern boundary, the part of the land that had eventually been sold off and subdivided to create the Lakeview Heights community. The deed stated that the original owner, my ancestor, had retained a permanent, non-transferable easement over the adjacent land for the purposes of cattle watering and shoreline access. In simple terms, my family had forever rights to use the lakefront that the HOA now claimed as their exclusive common area. But wait, it gets better. The clause went on to detail that if the land usage of the dominant estate, my property, ever changed, specifically citing a hypothetical scenario of modern subdivision and common development, which is exactly what the HOA was, the easement would automatically convert into a deed of reversion for the entire waterfront strip, from the high water mark to the original boundary line. The legal implications were staggering. Mr. Sterling and the HOA had based their entire community boundary on a survey that was, generously speaking, incomplete. They'd purchased and developed the land without recognizing this ancient, binding clause. They thought their power was absolute. They were wrong. The document proved I not only owned the ground my barn stood on, but the entire, pristine, manicured lakefront beach the HOA had been policing and charging dues for since 1985. The HOA didn't just want my barn. They were sitting on my beach. My next step was simple. I laminated a high-resolution copy of the 1812 patent deed and waited for the 60-day legal hearing. I didn't send a letter. I didn't call. I decided to let Mr. Sterling and his lawyers walk right into my trap. The hearing was in a small, stuffy conference room. Mr. Sterling was smug, his lawyer was dismissive. The HOA's entire argument rested on the modern CC&Rs and a recent, flimsy survey. They presented their case first, demanding the court issue an immediate injunction for the barn's removal. When it was my turn, I didn't say a word about the barn. I stood up, walked to the table, and dramatically unrolled the massive, full-color copy of the 1812 patent deed. Sound. A significant, deep thud as the scroll is placed on the table. The silence in the room was deafening. Sterling's face drained of color as the words sank in. I didn't even need a lawyer to argue the point. The document was a legal title waive. It was a title claim that superseded their entire modern community charter. The judge, after consulting with a local property law historian, upheld the validity of the 1812 patent deed and the reversion clause. The verdict was an utter rout. The barn was safe. But more importantly, the entire waterfront, the centerpiece of the Lakeview Heights community, the very land they had been fighting me over, was legally determined to be my private property. The HOA had to immediately cease charging lake access fees, dismantle all common area infrastructure on the strip, and they had to issue a formal, humiliating apology. Their demands for my barn had become a complete, self-inflicted disaster that cost them their most valuable asset. The power, once again, rested with the history of the land, not the bureaucracy of the board. So what did I learn? Never let an organization with a three-ring binder and an inferiority complex convince you that their paperwork trumps centuries of legal history. Always dig deeper. Always look for the antiquity. But the battle with Lakeview Heights wasn't over. After losing their lakefront, the HOA was desperate to reclaim their authority. They tried to go after another one of my properties, a large parcel of land they had grand plans for. Their next move? Spending a staggering $12 million to build a brand new elite golf course. My response was even more audacious than the 1812 deed. I waited 10 months until the course was perfect, then pulled out a forgotten 1970s environmental law that allowed me to reclassify their pristine fairways as a municipal solid waste landfill. Smooth CTA. If you want to see exactly how I took the HOA's $12 million crown jewel and turned it into a useless, unbuildable pit of garbage, click on the end screen now to watch. HOA spent $12 million on a golf course. I waited 10 months, then reclassified their fairways as a landfill. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe in fighting back against overreaching authority. Your support helps bring these stories of justice to light. I'll see you in the next video.